My name is Tenzin, and I am speaking now because silence is no longer a virtue. It is a crime. For 47 years, I was the sole guardian of what my ancestors called the Migyur, the unchanging ones. You, in your world below, would call them Yetis. For nearly 5 decades, I kept their family safe in the high, brutal passes of the Himalayas, hidden from everything. But then the soldiers came. They carried guns and machines that see through rock, and they were not looking for lost climbers. I am recording this now because you need to know what they did. You need to know what they forced the Migyur to reveal about themselves, and more importantly, what they revealed about us, about our own species. My life is over, but the truth of it cannot die with me in this thin, cold air. This is my final confession. My credibility is this place itself. I am recording this in the ruins of a collapsed gompa, a monastery overlooking the Khumbu icefall. This has been my home since I was a young man. I am not some trekker with a strange story. I am part of the mountain now. I know the deep, groaning sound the glacier makes as it shifts in the dead of night. A sound that travels through the stone floor and into your bones. I know the sharp hiss of my Primus stove as it fights the oxygen-starved air, a desperate little battle for warmth. I know the percussive thump-thump of my own heart in the absolute silence above 18,000 feet, a sound so loud you think it must be audible for miles. The mountain keeps its secrets, and for most of my life, I wanted to become one of them. I didn't come here seeking enlightenment. I came here as a penance. I was fleeing the guilt of a landslide in my village below, a disaster that swallowed my home, my wife, my children, a disaster I was warned about, a shift in the wind, a strange trembling in the earth. The elders saw the signs. They told me to raise the alarm, to move the village. But I was young, arrogant. I thought I knew better than superstition. My inaction cost me everything. I ran from the whispers of my neighbors, from the ghosts of my family, and I came here to this ruin to disappear, to let the wind and the ice scour my name from the world. I wanted to pay for my failure by dissolving into the silence, a ghost haunted by other ghosts. For years, that is all I was. My days were a ritual of emptiness. I would chant the old mantras, not for salvation, but for the vibration in my chest that proved I was still alive. I watched the sun crawl across the face of Nuptse. I listened to the wind howling through the prayer flags I never replaced, their colors fading to gray, their blessings fraying into nothing. The cold was my constant companion, a physical manifestation of the emptiness inside me. My penance was to feel nothing, to interact with nothing, to simply exist as a stone among stones until the mountain finally claimed me. I had failed to protect my family of blood, so I resolved to have no family at all. My punishment was absolute isolation. My penance, my world of silent atonement, ended the day the silence broke. It wasn't the familiar crack of shifting ice or the roar of a distant avalanche. It was a sound that didn't belong. It started low, a deep, guttural, chuffing sound, thick with a pain that felt ancient. It was followed by a thin, desperate whimper, the kind of sound a small thing makes when it is terrified and watching its world end. It was not the sound of a predator. It was the sound of profound suffering, and it echoed off the ice walls, finding its way into the cracks of my stone shelter and into the deeper cracks of my soul. It was a sound that demanded a witness, and in that moment, I was faced with a choice I had not confronted in decades. I could remain a ghost, pull my blanket tighter, and let the mountain's harsh laws play out. I could honor the terms of my exile and stay dead to the world. Or I could face whatever was making that sound, break my long vow of non-interference, and risk the very solitude that had become my identity. The memory of my village, of my inaction, rose up in me like bile. I had heard a warning once before and done nothing. I could not do it again. I had to know. I had to choose to act. My sacred isolation was a monument to my failure, and that sound was threatening to tear it down. I pulled on my worn boots, the leather stiff with cold, and moved out into the blinding white. The sound led me toward a fresh rockfall near the base of a sheer cliff. And there, I saw it, her. She was massive. A creature of white and gray fur that seemed woven from the mountain's own storm clouds. One of her legs was crushed, twisted at a horrifying angle by a fallen boulder. The snow around it stained a dark, steaming crimson. But she wasn't alone. Huddled behind her, shivering, were two small, terrified younglings, their fur almost pure white, their huge, dark eyes fixed on me. They were the source of the whimpering. She was the source of that deep, guttural sound of pain. I froze. My mind, numb for years, was screaming, "Run, hide, forget." This was a monster from the old stories, a creature that was not meant to be seen, but my eyes were locked on hers. There was no malice in them, only agony and a fierce, desperate protectiveness. She shifted her weight, shielding the little ones more completely, and a low growl rumbled in her chest. It was a clear warning. I held up my empty hands, a gesture I hoped was universal. And slowly, carefully, I began to back away. I didn't run. I retreated. My heart hammered against my ribs, not just with fear, but with a terrible, familiar feeling. The sight of a family in peril. Back in my ruin, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely grind the herbs. I found the strongest ones for pain and swelling, the same ones my grandmother used for broken-limbed yaks. I mixed them into a thick poultice. Then, I took a large portion of my own dwindling rations, a full bowl of tsampa, roasted barley flour, and mixed it with hot water into a nourishing paste. With my heart in my throat, I walked back out, but not all the way. I stopped 100 yards from them, at a large, flat-topped boulder that marked a kind of natural boundary. I placed the poultice and the bowl of food on the stone, and then I retreated to my solitude, my mind reeling. I had interfered. The ghost had acted. The next morning, driven by a compulsion I couldn't name, I returned to the boulder. The poultice and the bowl were gone. There was no sign of them, no tracks leading away that I could decipher in the wind-scoured snow. But they had taken it. The offering had been accepted. I stood there for a long time, the cold burning my lungs, a feeling washing over me that I hadn't felt since my childhood. It was not fear, it was awe, and I made a decision no one could ever know. The world below would not see a mother protecting her young. They would see a monster, a prize, a threat. This would be my secret, a secret inside the greater secret of my own exile. My penance was over. My vigil had just begun. I couldn't know it then, but this was the start of everything. This single act of compassion would unravel a secret far older than my own guilt, and put me on a collision course with forces that believe they own the world. The story of what happened in these mountains, of the gifts they gave me, and the terrible truth the soldiers forced them to reveal. It needs to be heard. Before I tell you about the ritual we created, about the first impossible gift they left on that stone, I need to ask for your help. Please, make sure this recording survives. Click the like button, subscribe to this channel so my voice isn't lost to the static, and share this with anyone you know who believes there are still secrets left in the world. You must stay until the end. You must understand what they truly were and what we have become. This became our ritual, the strange and silent engine of our new lives, a gift for a gift. Every day, just before dusk, I would prepare the tsampa and a fresh poultice of mountain herbs, and every day, I would walk the same 100 yards to the flat-topped boulder, place the offering, and turn my back without a second look. The first few days, I was just acting on instinct, a deep need to mend what was broken. But soon, it became the most important act of my day. It was a prayer I could offer that I knew was being heard. My old life had been defined by a failure to act. This new life, this strange vigil, was being built on a single, repeated action. The emptiness in my chest, the one carved out by grief, was slowly being filled by a sense of purpose. I was no longer a ghost waiting to fade. I was a guardian. The morning after my second delivery, I found the first miracle. The bowl was empty, licked clean, but it was not just empty. Next to it sat a single piece of clear quartz, a perfect six-sided crystal, angled so that it caught the first rays of the morning sun and fractured the light into 100 tiny rainbows against the gray stone. It pulsed with light. It was not a random rock. It was placed. It was deliberate. An answer. A thank you. A payment. That was the moment I understood. This was not a one-way act of charity. It was a transaction. A pact was being formed between a broken man and a broken beast. A pact with no words, sealed on a stone table under the gaze of the highest peaks on earth. I picked up the crystal. It was cold and smooth and felt like a key in my palm. The days that followed fell into a sacred rhythm. I left food. In the morning, the food was gone, and a new token was in its place. The gifts were always from the mountain, but never random. One day it was a fossil, the perfect spiral of a creature that lived in an ocean here millions of years ago. Another day, a single, flawless eagle feather, its white tip like a dab of fresh snow. They were showing me the mountain's secret treasures, things a person could search a lifetime for and never find. My small ruin started to fill with these objects. They were my salary, my proof. My life, which had been a study in emptiness, was now about collecting and deciphering the clues left by a legend. The mystery became my daily bread, far more nourishing than the tsampa I was giving away. I learned the first rule of our agreement by almost breaking it. One afternoon, consumed by a foolish need to see her progress, I decided to walk a few feet past the boulder. I just wanted a quick glance, to see if she was putting weight on the leg. I took 2 steps beyond the stone line, and the air itself changed. A low, deep hum vibrated through the soles of my boots, a sound that felt less like hearing and more like a pressure change in my own chest. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a roar, but it was an absolute, undeniable wall of sound that said, "No further." I stopped, my blood running cold. I understood. The boulder was the boundary. It was our neutral ground. I never crossed the line of the boulder. That was their price for trust, a price I was more than willing to pay. The second rule I learned through a similar mistake, born of the same human weakness, the need to see. I had an old pair of Russian binoculars from my youth, and one evening, I hid myself in a high crevice of my ruin and tried to watch them. I could see very little, just a large, pale shape moving in the deep shadows near the rockfall. It felt wrong, like I was a spy in my own sanctuary. The next morning, my heart sank. The bowl of tsampa was still there, untouched, a skin of ice frozen over the top. My offering had been refused. They knew they were being watched. They were not specimens in my private study. They were partners, and the pact demanded my trust be as blind as theirs. I put the binoculars away after that. I never stayed to watch them. Their language was not just the hum of warning. I began to learn its nuances, its textures. There was a soft, chuffing sound, almost like a quiet laugh that I would sometimes hear carried on the wind, the sound of the young ones playing. There was a series of sharp, percussive clicks, like stones being tapped together, that often preceded the sound of their movement away from the nesting area. These were not the grunts and roars of a simple beast. It was communication, complex and layered. The silence of my exile was replaced by a new kind of listening. I was no longer listening for nothing. I was listening for everything, for the subtle signals that defined the edges of their world and my place within it. The mountain was speaking to me again, but this time in a language I was beginning to understand. A few weeks into our ritual, I was rewarded with a sign of my success. I was at the boulder, collecting an offering of smooth river stones laid out in a fan shape, when a movement caught my eye. It was her, the mother, at the edge of the shadows. She stood for just a moment, her form immense against the snow. She put weight on the injured leg. She limped, yes, but she was mobile. She was healing. My simple herbs, my meager offerings, had worked. She held my gaze for a heartbeat, her dark eyes unblinking, and then she turned and vanished back into the rocks. There was no sound, no hum of warning. It was a simple, silent acknowledgement. You helped. It worked. In that moment, I felt the weight of my past failure, the landslide, my family, lighten just for a second. I had failed to save them, but I was succeeding in saving these. The true test of our bond came with the first great storm of the season. It wasn't a squall, it was a monster, a week-long blizzard that buried the world in a shroud of white. The wind shrieked like a demon, and the snow piled into drifts 15, 20 feet high. The path to my boulder, the very lifeline of our ritual, was gone. It was buried under an impassable wall of snow. For 3 days, I was trapped. I couldn't make my delivery. I despaired. I imagined them starving, or worse, deciding I had abandoned them and moving on, disappearing forever into the high peaks. The old guilt, the familiar feeling of powerlessness in the face of the mountain's wrath, came rushing back. I was failing again. My vigil was over, defeated by a storm. On the 4th morning, the wind finally died. The silence was absolute. I looked out from my ruin, my heart a cold stone of dread, expecting to see nothing but an unbroken sea of white. But I was wrong. There, stretching from the foot of my crumbling doorway, was a path. It wasn't a faint trail. It was a deep, Wide trench stomped through the highest, most treacherous drifts, leading directly to the flat-topped boulder. The footprints inside the trench were staggering, each one the size of a snowshoe, pressed deep into the compacted snow. They hadn't just waited. They hadn't despaired. They had recognized the problem, and they had engineered a solution. They hadn't just cleared a path for themselves. They had cleared a path for me. That path in the snow was more than a path. It was a statement. It was the moment they stopped being creatures I was caring for and became partners who were caring for me. It was an act of stunning intelligence and, I had to admit, of empathy. They knew I was their source of food, and they had taken extraordinary measures to protect their provider. I walked that path, my boots fitting easily into the massive prints, and a feeling washed over me that I had not felt since I was a boy holding my father's hand. A feeling of profound safety, of being looked after. My 47 years of solitude, of penance, of being utterly alone in the world, had ended in a trench dug by a Yeti. I was not alone anymore. After the blizzard, the nature of their gifts began to change. They grew more complex, more abstract. The pretty stones and feathers were replaced by things that felt like messages. One morning, I found a large, flat piece of slate, and scratched onto its surface with what looked like a shard of charcoal were patterns. They looked like star charts, constellations of distant suns, but none that I recognized from any human map of the heavens. They see what we don't, I thought to myself. The old saying of the elders taking on a terrifying, literal new meaning. They were showing me not just their world, but their way of seeing the world. And it was a vision that was ancient, and vast, and utterly alien. My role was shifting from keeper to student, and then came the gift that changed everything. I found it resting in the center of the boulder, so dark against the snow it seemed to drink the light. It was a piece of metal, heavy and cold in my hand. It was twisted, as if from a great impact, but one edge had a clean, machined bevel to it. It was not from a crashed airplane or a climber's lost gear. It was pitted and scarred in a way that spoke of immense age, of millennia spent locked in glacial ice. It felt wrong. It was a piece of technology, but a technology so ancient it had become a fossil. It hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, a vibration that made the teeth in my jaw ache. It was the first clue that the secret I was keeping was far, far older and stranger than I could ever have imagined. I didn't know what to do with it. This object felt dangerous. It was a violation of the natural order of this place. It was proof of something that shouldn't exist. My first instinct was to throw it down a crevasse, to let the glacier swallow it again. But it was a gift. It was part of their story, a story they were now entrusting to me. To throw it away would be a betrayal, so I did the only other thing I could think of. I took it back to my ruin, and I prized up one of the heavy flagstones in the floor. I wrapped the alien metal in an old piece of canvas and buried it in the frozen earth below my home. I was no longer just hiding their existence. I was now hiding their history. A secret buried within a secret. My life settled into this new, deeper reality. My days were the ritual of the Sampa. My nights were spent contemplating the strange gifts, trying to piece together the story they were telling me. The quartz, the fossil, the star chart, the impossible metal fragment buried under my floor. The rules were clear. The boulder was our bridge, blind trust was our language, and the deep hum was the law. I had come to this mountain seeking an ending, a slow erasure. Instead, I had found a beginning. I had become the sole curator of a museum whose only visitor was me. I thought I had found a fragile piece, a purpose that finally quieted the ghosts of my past. But that piece of metal was a seed, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any wind, that it was only a matter of time before something else came looking for it. The years that followed were a quiet study in reciprocity, a slow weaving of two worlds that were never meant to touch. The young Migyur grew, their whimpers replaced by the confident, huffing sounds of adolescence. Their gifts on the stone evolved from simple geological treasures to something far more profound. They began leaving charcoal-like scratches on pieces of flat slate, and over time, I recognized what I was seeing. They were drawing. They were drawing the jagged outline of the peaks that surrounded us, the shape of my own ruined Gampa, even crude, stick-like figures of a stooped man leaving a bowl on a rock. They were observing me, learning from me, and reflecting my own existence back at me. It was the most profound conversation I had ever had. and it was conducted in complete silence, through pictures on stone left in the pre-dawn cold. My strange, lonely life had found its mirror in them, and I was terrified and exhilarated by what I saw. My role as a simple provider was changing. I was becoming an archivist. One morning, the gift was a collection of bird skulls, arranged in a perfect spiral. The next, a series of colored stones laid out in a pattern that mimicked the flow of the glacier below. I began to keep a journal, not of my own thoughts, but of theirs. A logbook of their gifts, their language. I sketched each slate drawing, each stone pattern, trying to decipher the grammar of their silent world. It became my life's work, a sacred scholarship. I was no longer just the keeper of their physical safety. I was the sole librarian of their culture, their art, their science. The weight of this responsibility was immense. It was a secret history of the world, and I was its only reader. This library of stones and scratches was a testament to an intelligence so patient, so alien, it humbled me to my very core. They see what we don't. The old saying echoed in my mind, and I finally understood it was not a warning, but a simple statement of fact. The great male, the patriarch of this hidden family, remained a ghost. I would glimpse his colossal form moving through a blizzard, a shape more felt than seen, or hear the deep, resonant hum of his presence echoing from a distant ridge. I knew he was watching. I knew he was the ultimate guardian of this place. His approval was unspoken but absolute. He allowed my presence. He allowed the ritual. Then, one morning, I understood the terrifying depth of his power. I approached the boulder to find it occupied by the carcass of a snow leopard. It was a magnificent, full-grown male. Its life ended not by a messy struggle, but with a clean, powerful break to the neck. It was placed carefully, almost reverently, on the stone. It was not a threat. It was a gift of a different kind, a message of absolute dominance and fierce protection. The alpha predator of this mountain was acknowledging me, providing for me in his own way, and declaring this small patch of rock and ice, and all who lived on it, as his. That offering of the leopard shook me. It was a reminder that for all their intelligence and gentle reciprocity, they were creatures of immense, wild power. They were not my pets. They were not my subjects. We were neighbors, bound by a pact of mutual survival in a place that was designed to kill us both. I took a small portion of the meat, as I knew I must to honor the gift, and cooked it over my small stove. It felt like a sacrament. That night, the wind howled with a particular fury, but for the first time in years, I did not feel like a solitary man on the edge of the world. I felt like a citizen of a very small, very secret kingdom. I had a protector whose strength I could barely comprehend. My fears shifted. I no longer feared the mountain's wrath. I began to fear the world below, the world of men, who would see that magnificent leopard not as a gift, but as a trophy, and its killer as a monster to be hunted down and destroyed. My vigil was not just about feeding them. It was about hiding them from my own kind. The mountain itself soon tested the limits of our pact. A fever took hold of me, a vicious, burning sickness that came on fast. I don't know what it was. The flu, altitude sickness, something I ate. Within a day, I was too weak to stand, my body alternating between shivering fits and a consuming fire. I couldn't make my daily trip to the boulder. I lay on my mat, delirious, listening to the wind rise outside, a storm coming to claim me. I thought of my family, of the landslide. My life, it seemed, was destined to end in failure, this time failing the strange, secret family the mountain had given me. My last coherent thought was a plea for forgiveness, whispered into the frozen air of my shelter. I had failed to make my offering. The ritual was broken. I had abandoned them, and now the mountain was taking its payment. I closed my eyes and surrendered to the cold darkness, certain I would never wake up. The guilt of my past was finally being answered with the finality of my present. I awoke to silence, not the usual ringing silence of the high peaks, but a thick, muffled quiet. The fire in my body had cooled to embers, and my head was clear, but something was wrong. The light filtering into my ruin was dim, soft, and blue. I crawled to the entrance, my muscles screaming in protest, and my breath caught in my throat. The entire opening of my stone shelter was blocked by a wall of snow. It was not a drift. It was a perfectly constructed wall, packed dense and high, shielding the entrance from the wind. I could hear the storm still raging outside, a distant, frustrated howl, but inside it was calm and still. They had not come for their food, they had come for me. They had heard my weakness, understood the threat of the storm, and they had built a shelter around my shelter. They had saved my life. I had built a life on the memory of one failure to protect. They had now erased it with one act of protection. I pressed my hand against the snow wall, feeling the faint vibration of the wind on the other side. Tears froze on my cheeks. The debt I felt I owed the universe, the penance I had been paying for 47 years, was suddenly, inexplicably, paid. Not by a god, not by a mantra, but by a creature of myth who had shown me a compassion I thought had vanished from the world. I was no longer their keeper. I was not a ghost performing a ritual. I was a part of their family, as surely as the young ones who left drawings on the stones. When the storm finally broke 2 days later, I found a path cleared for me, just like before. But the offering I left on the boulder that day was different. I left my usual bowl of tsampa, but next to it, I left my own private treasure, my wife's small, silver locket, the only thing I had salvaged from the wreck of my old life. It was the most precious thing I had, a gift for a gift. My old ghosts were finally at peace, but peace in the high Himalayas is a fragile thing. The world below has a way of crawling upward, its noise and its curiosity like a rising tide. The first sign of its encroachment was a sound that did not belong, a high-pitched "iun-phone oseditrin amn," insect-like buzzing that sliced through the sacred quiet. A drone. It belonged to a party of loud, wealthy foreign trekkers making their way up the valley. They were flying it recklessly, letting it soar up the high cliffs, its camera eye swiveling, searching for what they called epic shots. I watched from my ruin, my heart turning to ice, as the drone flew closer and closer to the sheltered ridge that concealed the Migyor's nesting area. It was a blind, unthinking intrusion. A piece of consumer technology about to stumble upon a secret that had been kept for millennia. My fragile peace was being threatened by a toy. The modern world, in all its casual, thoughtless arrogance, had arrived at my doorstep, and it was about to burn my kingdom down. The great male appeared on the ridge, a flash of white against the dark rock. He didn't roar, he simply stood, tracking the drone's path with a terrifying, cold focus. He was poised to act, and I knew his response would be swift, violent, and utterly conclusive. He would bring the drone down, and the wreckage would be a clue. The trekkers would investigate. They would send more drones, or even come themselves. An act of defense would become an act of discovery. His primal strength was a liability in this new kind of fight. My mind raced. I couldn't let him reveal himself. I had to intervene, to turn the threat away without confirming its existence. The secret was mine to protect, not just with gifts of food, but with cunning. My role had shifted again. I was no longer just a guardian, I was a strategist, and the enemy was a buzzing machine piloted by a curious fool who had no idea what he was about to uncover. I had to become the ghost again, but this time, a ghost who could act. In a panic, I fumbled for the small signal mirror I kept in my emergency kit, a relic from my days before exile. I scrambled to a high point on my ruin that gave me a clear line of sight to the drone, my hands shaking, my breath coming in ragged bursts. The sun was bright, the glare off the snow immense. I angled the mirror, catching the brilliant sunlight, and aimed the flash directly at the drone's camera lens. It was a desperate, foolish hope. For a second, nothing happened. The drone continued its steady, invasive path toward the ridge. Then, it wavered. It tilted, its buzzing sound changing pitch as its sensors were overwhelmed by the sudden blast of light. It was like blinding a hawk in mid-flight. I flashed it again and again, a frantic, silent scream of light. The drone stopped, hovered uncertainly for a moment, and then turned, retreating back down the valley. The operator, blinded and confused, had recalled his machine. Relief washed over me, so intense it made my knees weak. I had won. I had protected them. I slid down from my perch, my heart hammering with a terrifying mix of adrenaline and triumph. But my victory was short-lived. My act of protection was also an act of revelation. As I looked down the valley, I saw the trekking party had stopped. One of them, a guide, was pointing up, not at the drone, but at my ruin. He had seen it. He had seen the flashes of light originating from the supposedly empty monastery. They couldn't know what they saw. Not really. but they saw something. A signal, a sign of life, a person. The whispers would start, down in the tea houses of Namche Bazaar. A strange light, a mad hermit in the high passes, a ghost who was not a ghost at all. My anonymity, the very shield that had protected this place for decades, was cracking. The wall of silence I had built around my life had been breached, not by a sound, but by a flash of desperate light. I had saved the family, but I may have doomed myself, and them along with me. The trekkers and their drone eventually moved on, disappearing down the valley, but they left a poison in the air. The silence that returned was different, tainted with paranoia. Every distant sound, every shift of the wind made me flinch. I felt exposed, seen. My perfect hidden world now had a crack in it, and I knew that the curious nature of man would work its way into that crack, widening it until my whole world shattered. My greatest fear was no longer that the Migyur would leave. It was that someone else would come looking for them. The story of the strange flashes from the haunted Gompa would become a minor legend, a curiosity for the next season's climbers. I had traded their immediate safety for a future threat I couldn't measure. I had become a point on a map, a mystery to be solved. And I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that some mysteries are too tempting for the world below to leave alone. My protection had become a beacon. The following days were filled with a tense watchfulness. I scanned the valley constantly with my binoculars, the very tool I had sworn not to use on the Migyur. Now, I used it to watch my own kind, my stomach in knots. The gifts on the boulder continued, but even they felt different. One morning, I found a piece of slate with a single, sharp line scratched across it, and below it, a scattering of smaller, frantic marks. It was a warning. It was a picture of the drone's flight path and the chaos it represented. They knew. They had seen the threat, and they had seen my intervention. They understood the new danger we were in. The pact was no longer just about food and survival. It was now about intelligence, about a shared threat assessment. We were allies in a silent war against a world that was growing too small, too loud, and too curious. My mistake had bound us closer together, not in peace, but in shared jeopardy. Sorrow has the same sound in every language. This is a truth I would come to understand in the most profound way possible. But before that moment of shared grief, before the soldiers came with their terrible machines, there was this period of shared anxiety. The drone incident had changed the very air we breathed. I began to reinforce my ruin, piling loose stones to make it look even more impassable, more like a natural part of the mountain. I tried to erase my own footprints, my path to the boulder, using a branch to sweep the snow behind me. My life became a frantic effort to become invisible again, but I knew it was futile. You cannot erase a story once it has been told. And the story of the light from the ruin was now making its way down the mountain, carried on the breath of guides and porters. A tiny seed of a rumor that would eventually grow into a harvest of devastation. I had spent a lifetime running from the ghosts of my past, only to find myself haunted by the specter of the future. The true turning point, the moment that shattered my penance and remade my soul, arrived on the windless, brutally cold anniversary of the landslide. It was the day my old world had ended, the day my family was buried under rock and ice. As I did every year, I lit a single stick of incense, its thin ribbon of smoke struggling in the oxygen-starved air. I began my private ritual of grief, chanting the names of my wife and children, my voice a raw, broken thing. The words were not a prayer for them, but a punishment for myself, a reminder of the warning I ignored, the lives I failed to save. I was lost in that desolate ceremony, my eyes squeezed shut against the tears that froze on my face. A man utterly alone in a self-made prison of memory. The only sounds were my choked voice, the hiss of the wind finding a new crack in my ruin, and the frantic, hollow drumming of my own heart. I was nothing but a vessel for old pain, a ghost reliving the moment he was created, utterly and completely alone in my sorrow. I felt it before I saw it, a change in the air, a sudden stillness, the feeling of being watched, a pressure so immense it silenced the very wind. My chanting faltered. The hair on my arm stood on end. My first thought was of the great male, that he had finally decided my presence was a liability. I slowly, fearfully, opened my eyes, and my breath caught in my throat, a knot of ice and shock, standing at the very threshold of my ruin, silhouetted against the blinding white of the snowfields outside. was one of the young Migyur. It was nearly full-grown now, its shoulders almost as broad as the entrance itself. It was closer than any of them had ever dared to come, a flagrant violation of the unspoken boundary between our worlds. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't aggressive. It simply stood there, its massive form perfectly still, its dark, intelligent eyes fixed on me. It was a terrifying, sacred, impossible moment. A creature of legend standing in the doorway of a forgotten hermit. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Why was it here? Had I done something wrong? Was the fever returning, bringing visions with it? I remained frozen on my knees, the half-burnt stick of incense smoking in my numb fingers. The young Migyur took a slow, deliberate step forward, not into my ruin, but just onto the stone sill, its huge, furred feet silent. It lowered its immense body and sat, its posture mirroring my own kneeling form. It just watched me, its head tilted with an unnerving, profound curiosity, and then it let out a sound. It was not the hum of warning I had learned to respect. It was not the playful chuffing of its youth. It was a new sound, a low, mournful hum that seemed to start deep in its chest and vibrate through the very stone floor beneath us. It was a sound that carried a weight, a texture of deep, resonant melancholy. It was the sound of a bell tolling for a loss too great to name. In that instant, everything I thought I knew about them, and about myself, was undone. The low, mournful hum it was producing was not a random animal noise. It was a note, and it was the exact same tonal key as my own grief-stricken chant. It was not mimicking me, not like a parrot. The sound was too pure, too full of genuine sorrow. It had heard the sound of my pain, and it was answering with its own. It was a call and response of pure emotion, a shared chord of loss struck between two species on the roof of the world. It was sharing my grief. It was sitting vigil with me. A creature that the world believed to be a mindless beast was looking at a broken man and showing him a compassion so profound, so elemental, that it bypassed language entirely. It had recognized my sorrow and had come to tell me I was not alone in it. That act of empathy was a force more powerful than any avalanche. The 47-year wall of guilt and self-hatred that I had built around my heart did not just crack, it crumbled into dust. It was obliterated by the shared note of a grieving Yeti. I looked at this magnificent creature, its dark eyes holding mine, and I no longer saw a myth or a beast I was keeping. I saw family. I saw a being capable of an empathy so pure it was humbling. For the first time since the landslide, the crushing weight on my soul lifted. The ghosts of my past did not vanish, but they grew quiet, their whispers finally silenced by that resonant, compassionate hum. Sorrow has the same sound in every language, even in a language that has no words. The young Migyur sat with me for what felt like an hour, its mournful note a steady anchor in the storm of my emotions. Then, as silently as it arrived, it stood, gave me one last, deep look, and disappeared back into the white. I was alone again. But my solitude was no longer a punishment. It was a sanctuary I now shared. The very next morning, I understood just how deeply that moment had changed our pact. When I approached the boulder, my steps lighter than they had been in decades. The offering waiting for me sent a tremor of shock through my entire body. The empty sampa bowl was there, as always, but next to it, placed squarely in the center of the stone, was not a crystal or a fossil. It was another piece of the strange, dark metal. The impossible metal. The fragment I had found years ago and buried beneath my floor. This piece was different. It was smaller, curved, like a shard from a sphere. A wave of understanding washed over me. The first piece had not been a random gift. It had been a test of my discretion, of my ability to keep a secret of that magnitude. My shared grief, my acceptance into their emotional world had been the key that unlocked the next level of trust. They were not just giving me tokens anymore, they were giving me answers. I rushed back to my ruin, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I pried up the heavy flagstone, my fingers scrabbling at the frozen dirt beneath. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped the original piece of metal from its canvas shroud. I laid it on the floor next to the new fragment. They were clearly from the same source, sharing that same unnatural density and ancient, pitted texture. But they were not random chunks. The curved edge of the new piece looked as if it might, with other fragments, form a larger whole. It was a piece of a puzzle. A puzzle so old it made the mountains themselves feel young. They had been waiting. They had been waiting for the right moment, for the right sign of understanding, to begin showing me the truth. My role had changed once again. I was no longer an archivist of their culture. I was becoming a partner in the reconstruction of their history, a history not of this world. The gifts of metal became the new ritual. Every few days, another piece would appear on the boulder. Some were small, jagged slivers. Others were larger plates, one with a strange, honeycombed pattern on its interior surface. My small ruin became a workshop of impossible archaeology. I cleared a space on the stone floor and began to lay the pieces out, trying to find how they connected. It was a slow, painstaking process. Then, one morning, a piece arrived that made my blood run cold. It was a flat, triangular fragment, and etched into its surface, with a precision that was clearly not natural, were symbols. They were geometric, a series of interlocking lines and circles, utterly alien. They resembled neither Tibetan script nor any human language I had ever seen. They were like the star charts they had drawn, but this was not a picture. This was writing. This was language. This was the proof I had both craved and feared. My obsession was now total. A powerful, dangerous conflict grew within me. The guardian, the protector who had spent decades enforcing their secrecy, was now at war with the scholar, the witness who was desperate to understand the meaning of this cosmic wreckage. What were these symbols? What story did this shattered vessel tell? To solve this puzzle felt like a betrayal of the trust they had placed in me, a trust that had just saved my very soul. But to ignore it felt like a betrayal of the truth itself, a truth they were now actively, deliberately revealing to me. I was caught between protecting their existence and deciphering its meaning. The weight of it was immense. I spent my nights staring at the metal fragments laid out on my floor, the alien symbols seeming to glow faintly in the moonlight, feeling like a man who had been given the keys to a kingdom he was forbidden to enter. I began to sketch the symbols into my journal, right next to my drawings of their star charts and the patterns of colored stones. The two seemed to be connected, a visual language and a written one, intertwined. I tried to find patterns, repetitions, anything that could give me a foothold. The metal itself seemed to hum with a latent energy, a faint vibration I could feel through the stone floor, a constant, low thrum that spoke of ancient, sleeping power. I felt I was on the precipice of a revelation that would not just rewrite the history of this mountain, but of everything. The secret I was keeping was no longer about a family of strange creatures. It was about their origin. It was about this silent, broken thing they guarded. My penance for one secret, the secret of my guilt, had led me to become the sole keeper of a secret 1,000 times larger, a secret that had fallen from the stars. I had been saved by their compassion, and now I was being entrusted with their legacy. This shift, from caretaker to confidant, was the most profound journey of my life. The story they were telling me through these broken pieces of metal was the reason I am making this recording. It's a story of survival, of guardianship, and it leads directly to the arrival of the soldiers and the terrible choice they forced upon us all. The truth of who the Migyur really are is written in those alien symbols. Before I tell you about the men who came to hunt that truth, to claim it as a weapon, I need you to understand how important this is. The world needs to know what was lost. Please, help me make sure this story is not buried like that ship in the ice. Click the like button, subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion, and share this recording. You have to stay until the end. You have to bear witness to the truth they were forced to reveal. The arrival of the Chinese military patrol was nothing like the clumsy intrusion of the trekkers. There was no buzzing drone, no loud laughter. It was a violation of a different order. It began with the sound of a helicopter, but not the slow, civilian kind that ferries climbers. This was a low, percussive chop that hugged the terrain, a sound of predatory efficiency. I saw them from my high perch, two dark green machines disgorging a dozen figures in white winter camouflage. They moved with a chilling economy of motion, spreading out, not like men enjoying the scenery, but like hunters taking their stands. They carried no brightly colored backpacks, only black automatic rifles and matte gray equipment cases. Their silence was more terrifying than any noise. It was the silence of purpose, of an organism that knows its place at the top of the food chain. The world below hadn't just crawled up. It had arrived with military precision to claim this place. My kingdom had just been invaded. They reached my ruin by midday. The officer, A man with a face as hard and weathered as the rock around us approached alone. He did not ask for tea or shelter. His eyes, cold and analytical, scanned everything. The crumbling walls, my meager supplies, me. I played the part I had perfected for decades. The rambling, harmless old man, slightly mad from solitude, my eyes distant, my voice a frail whisper. He told me they were a PLA geological survey unit, updating border maps. A lie, and we both knew it. As he spoke, I overheard a crackle from the radio on his subordinate's chest. Unidentified energy signatures are strongest on this vector. The officer's eyes never left mine, gauging my reaction. They weren't looking for rocks, they were hunting a ghost in their machines, and they believed this haunted place and its mad hermit might be the key. My very existence had become a clue in their investigation. Their methods were a terrifying assault on the mountain's secrecy. They were not looking with human eyes, they were looking with technology that stripped away the mystery. At night, I would see the faint, ghostly green glow of their thermal imagers sweeping across the ridges where I knew the Migyur moved. During the day, they dragged sleds carrying ground-penetrating radar systems, scarring the pristine snow with their methodical grid searches. They were mapping the mountain's soul, translating its ancient secrets into cold data on a screen. Their maps have no soul. The Migyur knew how to hide from eyes, how to blend into a blizzard, how to become one with the rock and ice, but they couldn't hide their body heat. They couldn't hide the faint energy signature of the metal fragments they had given me, the very legacy I was trying to protect. The tools of my own kind were being used to hunt down the family I had sworn to keep safe, turning their very nature against them. My life, once a ritual of purpose, became a prison of paranoia. I was pinned down, unable to make my daily pilgrimage to the boulder. The sacred pact was broken by a greater fear. The Sampa sat untouched in my stores. Every crack of the ice was the sound of their boots approaching. Every shadow was one of their soldiers. I felt their invisible eyes on me constantly. The cold lens of a telephoto camera. The analytical gaze of the thermal scope. The weight of my original failure. The landslide, my inaction, returned with crushing force. I felt it happening all over again. I was poised to lead destroyers directly to the family I had sworn to protect. This time, my failure would not be a crime of omission, but a crime of presence. My very being here was the beacon that had guided them, and the guilt of it was a poison that left me sleepless and trembling in the dark. The inevitable breakthrough came on the third day. I watched through my binoculars, my stomach a knot of acid, as one of the soldiers knelt, pointing. They had found tracks. Not the massive, stomped-out prints from the blizzard path, which had long since been erased by the wind, but a single, clear impression in a sheltered alcove of snow. A footprint from one of the young ones, careless in its movement. They descended upon it not with wonder, but with forensic precision. They photographed it from every angle, took measurements, and poured a white substance into it, making a perfect plaster cast. Then, the officer took out a small, dark object and mounted it on a stake driven into the snow. A motion-activated camera, its unblinking eye aimed directly at the trail leading from the print. They were no longer just searching, they were laying a trap. They had found the thread, and now they would follow it to its source. The officer and 2 of his men paid me another visit that evening. The pretense of friendliness was gone. He didn't speak of maps. He held up the plaster cast of the footprint, its shape monstrous and undeniable in the fading light. "We are tracking a large, undocumented species," he said, his voice flat, his eyes boring into me. "Potentially dangerous to our operations. Have you seen what made this?" I looked at the cast, then at his face, and summoned every ounce of my practiced madness. I laughed a high, thin laugh, and spoke of the Chuti, the mischievous spirits of the snow, who leave strange tracks to fool men. I rambled about the wind carving shapes in the snow. I lied, and the lie felt like broken glass in my throat. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. But my performance sowed just enough doubt about my sanity, my reliability as a witness. I was no longer a potential guide. I was an obstacle, a local fool to be managed and ignored. It was a dangerous game, and I knew it was one I could not win. A frantic urgency seized me. I had to warn them. I had to tell them they were being hunted by men with invisible eyes and patient traps. But how? I couldn't risk the path to the boulder. It was certainly being watched. Every method of communication we had developed was now a liability. I went to the edge of my ruin, hidden in the deep shadows of dusk, and tried to replicate the low, resonant hum of warning. But my human lungs were too weak, the sound too thin. It was swallowed by the vastness. It was a whisper against a hurricane. How do you warn a legend to hide from technology that sees through rock and darkness? How do you tell a creature of instinct to fear an unblinking lens that will watch a trail for a week without sleeping? My attempts were pathetic. I was cut off, a general without a line to his troops, watching the enemy's battle plan unfold with perfect, terrible clarity. The trap worked. I didn't see it happen, but I saw the result. On the fifth morning, there was a sudden burst of activity from their camp. The casual pace was gone, replaced by a tense, excited energy. Radio chatter crackled through the air, sharp and urgent. The officer was standing with a small tablet, and I watched him point to a specific, high ridge. The ridge that led to their most secret nesting area, a place I had only ever seen from a great distance. The camera had caught one of them. The hunt was over. Now, the capture would begin. They began packing their survey equipment and unpacking more tactical gear. The pretense of being a geological survey was gone. They were a special operations team that had just confirmed its target. They were moving with the grim purpose of men about to engage a hostile force. And I knew I was the only person on Earth who understood that the hostile fauna they were about to neutralize was a family I loved. Their focus shifted. The ground-penetrating radar, which had been used in wide, sweeping patterns, was now concentrated on the base of the ridge the officer had indicated. A soldier stared intently at a screen, then called out. The officer rushed over. I saw him nod, a sharp, satisfied gesture. He spoke into his radio, and this time, the words were chillingly clear, carried on the thin, cold air. Energy signature confirmed. The deposit is here, subsurface, inside the cave system. My blood ran cold. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying certainty. The tracks, the camera. It was all part of it. But it wasn't the main objective. They weren't just hunting the Migyur. They were hunting the source of the metal. They were hunting the ship. The gifts they had given me. The secret history I held under my floor were not just a legacy. They were a beacon, and I had unwittingly curated its signal for an enemy I never knew was listening. The soldiers began unloading drilling equipment and explosive charges. They were going to blast their way into the cave system, a deep, ancient cavern that I knew was sealed by a rockfall from a winter long past. They were going to break into their final sanctuary. I knew in that moment that my life as a spectator, as a hidden guardian, was over. I could not stay in my ruin and watch this happen. The ghosts of my past screamed at me, the memory of my inaction in the face of disaster. I could not fail again. I pulled on my boots, my movements stiff but resolved. I had to follow them. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew I had to be there. My penance had led me to this moment, to the threshold of a tomb. I was the only one who knew the full truth of what lay behind that wall of rock, and as the soldiers began their final march, I followed, a ghost leaving his shelter to walk into the heart of the fire. I followed them from a distance, a ghost in their wake, my heart a stone in my chest. The explosive charge they set was not large, but in the brittle silence of that altitude, the sound was an obscenity. It was a sharp, violent crack that tore the sky apart, followed by the grinding roar of falling rock. Dust and ice crystals billowed from the newly opened wound in the mountainside. The soldiers moved in immediately, their tactical flashlights cutting sharp, white beams through the swirling haze. I crept closer, hiding behind a spur of rock, my own breath pluming in front of my face. When they stepped inside, their lights illuminated the truth. They had not opened a cave. They had broken into a tomb. Half buried in the glacial ice that formed the far wall, its form unmistakable even in its ruin, was the wreckage of a craft. It was impossibly ancient, its dark, pitted metal swallowing the light, its design utterly, terrifyingly, not of human hands. It was the source. The beams of their flashlights swept nervously around the vast cavern, and in their panicked dance, they revealed the second truth. The walls, every surface, from floor to ceiling, was covered in the slate scratchings I had come to know so well. It was a library, a vast, unbroken chronicle of their history, etched onto the very bones of the mountain. Here was the constellation they had drawn for me, glowing faintly with phosphorescence. There were the geometric symbols from the metal fragments, repeated in massive, deliberate patterns. And there, covering an entire wall, was a sprawling family tree of drawn figures, stretching back into a time so deep it was unimaginable. They were not animals hiding from the cold. They were custodians. They were the descendants of survivors, or a lineage of guardians who had watched over this crashed vessel for eons, keeping its silent vigil. And in the deepest recess of the cavern, huddled behind the dying engine of their ancestral home, I saw them, the family, cornered and terrified, their white fur stark against the alien metal. The officer was the first to speak, his voice cutting through the awestruck silence of his men. He did not see a library or a legacy. His eyes were fixed on the strategic prize. The energy signature is emanating from the primary structure. He barked into his radio. Secure the asset. Then his gaze shifted to the back of the cave, to the magnificent, trembling family. His face hardened. He saw them not as the librarians, but as a biological contamination, a threat to his clean extraction of the technology. Command, we have located the source. We also have multiple hostile fauna at the location. They are large, aggressive, requesting permission to neutralize. A moment of static, and then a cold, disembodied voice from the radio. Permission granted. Neutralize the hostiles. The soldiers raised their rifles. The small red dots of their laser sights danced across the great male's chest like drops of blood. The clicking sound of safeties being disengaged echoed in the tomb. It was happening. My failure was complete. But the great male, the silent patriarch I had only ever glimpsed, did something I will carry with me into the darkness. He did not roar. He did not charge. With a calm that was utterly shattering, he turned his back on the soldiers and walked to the hull of the ship. He placed his massive, furred hands on a specific panel, a panel covered in the same interlocking symbols I had seen on the very first metal fragment he gave me. He looked over his shoulder, his dark, ancient eyes finding mine across the cavern. It was not a look of fear or anger. It was a look of understanding, a look of finality, a shared purpose. Then he let out the deep, resonant hum, the sound that vibrated through stone, the sound of the mountain's own voice, and the ship, dead for millennia, groaned in response. A low thrum started, and the air began to shimmer with heat. In that instant, I knew. It was a self-destruct. He was choosing to erase his entire history, his entire world, rather than let it be captured and turned into a weapon. My mind shattered and reformed in a single, silent scream. I could not let them die. I could not let their history be annihilated. I had one weapon left, my 47 years of credibility as a madman of the mountain. I scrambled from behind my rock, my arms waving, my eyes wide with a terror that was only half feigned. "No! Get out!" I shrieked, my voice cracking in the thin air. The blast! It destabilized the geothermal vents. The whole ridge is unstable. I screamed about the ice core fracturing beneath us, about the mountain collapsing. I pointed at the shimmering air around the ship. Can't you feel it? The vibration? The whole mountain is about to come down. I used every story the elders ever told, every superstition, every ounce of my knowledge of this place, twisting it into a prophecy of imminent, fiery doom. I was the mountain's mad oracle, and I was calling down an apocalypse I would have to help create. The time for silent guardianship was over. It was time for a very, very loud lie. The officer hesitated, his rifle half raised. He was a soldier, trained to follow orders, but also trained in risk assessment. My hysterical ranting was just noise. But the evidence of his own senses was harder to ignore. He raised the thermal imager that hung from his neck and pointed it at the ship. The lie I was screaming was suddenly given life by a truth he could see. The ship's power core, awakened by the male's hum, was flaring. On his screen, it must have looked like a reactor going critical, a blossom of white-hot energy spreading through the vessel. The humming grew louder, the rock beneath our feet trembling. He saw a massive, uncontrolled heat spike. He was a man of logic. His mission was to secure an asset, not to be vaporized by it. "Retreat!" he yelled, his voice tight with sudden, genuine alarm. "Everyone out, now! The whole structure is critical." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and ran, his men scrambling after him, their mission forgotten in the face of imminent annihilation. As the soldiers scrambled out into the snow, I stayed. The officer's panicked retreat had bought me seconds. In that moment of terrible clarity, I finally understood the twist that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The first piece of metal they had given me, the one I had buried, had not been a gift or a test. It was a key. It was an invitation to this very place, to this final, terrible ceremony. They had been trying to show me all along. As the ship's vibration intensified, shaking loose shards of ice from the ceiling, I saw the female push her two terrified children toward a dark fissure at the back of the cave, a hidden escape route, a path to the other side of the mountain. She was ensuring the line would continue. She turned her head and gave me one last look, a look of profound, heartbreaking gratitude. I had been their keeper, and my final act was to hold the door while their future escaped. I raised my foot and brought my heavy boot down on a weak point in the icy floor, adding my own small force to the cataclysm. The avalanche was not a sound, it was the end of all sound, a deafening roar as the entire ridge gave way, just as I had prophesied. 1 billion tons of rock, ice, and snow came crashing down, sealing the cave entrance forever. The last thing I saw of the outside world was the soldiers' terrified faces turning to look back as the sky fell. The blast of air threw me backward, deep into the tomb, my body slamming against the cold hull of the ship. And then, darkness, complete, total darkness and a ringing silence. I am alive, but I am entombed. My small recorder, its battery light now blinking a fatal red, is the only light in this new, eternal night. I was the last librarian of a history that fell from the stars, and now the library is sealed. My penance, which began with a landslide that buried my family, ends with an avalanche that saved another. The mountain has finally, truly, claimed me. My vigil is over. I am recording these last words for you. This is my last confession. For 47 years, I thought I was sheltering them from the wild, from the brutal indifference of the mountain. I was wrong. I was sheltering them from you. We scour the heavens for signs of intelligent life, building vast and complex machines to listen for a whisper from the stars. Yet when we find intelligence right here beside us, living in our deepest forests or on our highest peaks, we do not greet it with wonder. We greet it with traps and guns and cages. We annihilate the strange intelligence that lives among us because it does not look like us, because it does not build the things we build, because its wisdom is silent and its history is written on stone instead of paper. We see a monster, a resource, or a threat. We never, ever see a neighbor. This is the truth the Migyur were forced to reveal. This recording is their only legacy, and it is my final act of penance. I do not know if the young ones made it through the passage. I have to believe they did. That somewhere, on the other side of this mountain, a new story is beginning. One without men and their machines. As for me, the air is growing thin. The cold is a welcome blanket. I thought I was their keeper, but in the end, they were mine. They saved me from a ghost and gave me a purpose. My name is Tenzin, and my life is over. But if my voice has reached you, do not let this truth be buried with me. Please, ensure this story survives. Click the like button. Subscribe to this channel so that other secrets are not lost to the silence. And share this with anyone who will listen. The story is over, but the work of understanding has just begun. There is another story, another secret, waiting for you on the screen now. Click on it. Keep listening. Keep questioning what you think you know. Sound of a small device being set gently on a rock surface, followed by a final, fading breath and then absolute, profound silence.